All right. All right. Well, let me introduce Najee. Um, just kind of started nice and slowly. I had the pleasure of getting introduced to Najee. I think by Shay, was it? You remember?
I think it was by way of Taylor.
By way of Taylor. Got it. Yep. Um, what's it called? Um, and just for everyone out there, Najee is a fine art muse and multidisciplinary artist whose work finds focus on ideas of representation, cultivation of body positivity, which I'm excited to talk about, expressions of movement, which I'm also excited to talk about, and community collaboration. Najee has mused for creatives such as Kehinde Wiley, um, most notably on the sculpture that is in um, uh, Richmond, Virginia, Rumors of War, and artists and educational institutions, including the Art Student League, Grand Central Atelier, and the New York Art Academy. And tonight we're going to be talking a little bit on one of two of my favorite words that Najee talks about, all normal and cool, the gaze and muse, and the gaze as inspiration, and that's GAZE, like the view that one has upon another. What I thought was really special in talking to Najee was he's like a hologram. There's so many different ways with art at the center, that he interfaces with representation, with artists, using him and his body to create their own work, for him creating his own work, and also you use your body as part of your work. So I'll stop talking for you, and maybe you can say a little bit about where you're coming from and what you do, and ease into kind of these topics du jour.
Yeah, absolutely. Emmett, thank you so much for that lovely and kind introduction. And thank you for making your space available for me to share a little bit about my work and my own history. Um, and thank you to everyone for tuning in and joining us here for this discussion. Um, I'm originally from Charleston, South Carolina, and I grew up there and was born and raised. Very simple upbringing. My parents, working class, very hard workers. But the one thing that I always remember from my childhood is the supportiveness the support that they gave me, and how excited they were about me taking on new endeavors, new ideas. So a little bit about my background. I come from an art and design background. I studied interior design and architecture at the Savannah College of Art and Design and graduated in 2005. And since that time, I've worked in the design industry, both as an interior designer as well as a product designer, mainly focused on wallpaper design. It was really great work. I enjoyed doing it, but it got to a point where I was feeling as though I was constantly making things for people or a small group of people that was really exclusive to that. You make something and it lives in someone's home. There's not really a lot to be shared to the world. And I'd gotten to the point where that sort of work just wasn't fulfilling to me. So in 2016, I did a lot of soul searching and stepped away from the design industry and began just pursuing my own creative projects. And that first project that I worked on was really finding a stronger yoga practice, a stronger way to just maintain my own mental health during a time where, when you're attached to a company or you're attached to an idea, it comes to represent you as a person in a way. And I wanted to gain a closer relationship with myself just by feeling comfortable in my own body. Since I moved to New York, I had a tremendous weight loss. At my heaviest, I was weighing 300 pounds. And through yoga and distance running, I run many, many miles every day, somewhere 5, 9 miles every day. Just found intense focus and so much comfort in my body that I really began to think about my own history in art and the muses that I came to know while I was in design school, just working from them, seeing how powerful they were to hold that presence in the room and be the one that everyone was paying attention to, simply, not simply because they were naked, but because they were truly comfortable in their skin and truly, you know, absorbed in the moment that was happening in front of everyone. So I decided I would then turn to be a muse. And so I went to the Art Students League, which was an interesting turn because that school has a huge, very long history with artists in New York. Everyone from Georgia O'Keeffe to Roy Lichtenstein took classes there and created art there. But then you have people like Madonna who even pose there as muses. So I felt very much in good company doing so, but it was the most liberating moment to go into this room full of strangers. You know, they not know who I am, where I'm from, but have this very intimate type of experience and walk away with them feeling like they had received something. So at the heart of my work and at the heart of what I do as a muse, it's really about this exchange and being of service to the artists, truly, in a way where you're there with them, you are moving through the hours of time that it takes to create something, and you're portraying something to them that they can grab hold to and make into a larger moment. You know, so that for me is how I got my start and a little bit of how I see musing as a whole.
Yeah, I love talking to you about that. I think, I guess a question I had even is like, do you think, you know, being a muse is a lost art, or is it like a thriving scene or community? Like you know, it's like I was talking about like the Division song, you know, a muse, and so much of their like album is centered around that. And I mean, I love them, and their album I think is amazing. But I don't know, it's just not a term I feel like you hear as much used in the day to day within creative circles. And I really love that you own it. You know, like it's not like a party line or something. You're like, it's a serious practice that there's a lot of artistic integrity and validity to it. And I also think the way that you got into it is a pretty cool organic narrative of just seeing the confidence that was displayed by those people, as you said, metaphorically and literally stripping down and just being comfortable in their skin. And you as an aspiring musician and artist, you know, that we're dealing with some of the challenges of being on stage and people looking at you. You said, you know, fuck it, if I can do this, then I can really get to the core of conquering how people view me and feeling comfortable with it. So my ramble is, I guess, like, what do you think about the practice or act of being a muse today in 2020?
Well, the act of being a muse right now in this moment is really, it's at a pivotal moment because it's been rocked. You know, the coronavirus has changed the way we all live our lives. It's changed the way that we even hold space with people, especially perfect strangers. And so much about this, you know, role that I'm taking on as muse is about being in a space with people that I don't know, with artists that I haven't yet worked with, because this is how we network. This is how we, you know, get to know each other. And that has had to change. So with social distance in mind, my practice has gone online quite a bit. I've been doing some virtual things with This Place NYC for one. They have a great Instagram. If you check them out, it's This Place NYC. And they host a lot of different events that are centered around having different muses come in and they'll portray their version of movement, whether that is for a camera and that's done in a private studio setting, or if it's live in person with a live audience as it used to be. And, you know, during the late part of the summer, we did some mixed versions where we had a partial live audience and then we had a partial at-home audience. But I feel like that energy that you get from being there in person can somehow be conveyed through the camera. And I think that when I talk about the gaze, it's really talking about this digital gaze that we're in right now. Everything has to shift to a digital lens. So how is it that I see myself? How is it that I frame myself? Even the way we present ourselves online, it's something that we need to think about. Are you just in a room, or are you in a space that really communicates who you are and maybe a little bit about yourself beyond what that person can see or what you're doing or saying. So yes, it's changed. And I also think that it's allowed people to gain closer relationships. I've been reached out to by a number of artists in a way that I don't think would have happened, say this pandemic didn't fall upon us. So I've been nurturing a lot more relationships. And this is more of the way that you would engage with an artist as a muse. You would have a relationship with them. They'd be someone who is already in your life, and then they look to you for that inspiration. So you really don't seek it out too much. It's something that just comes. And a lot of the artists that I work with, they are truly friends first. And I'm starting to branch out into different ways, but that's because I'm one of those models who've had definitely made a way to present themselves outside of in person.
I was going to ask Najee, like what you're talking on a little bit. My second favorite word that I feel like you've done a great job of, at least for me, normalizing. Which like there's almost like this esotericness to like muse or gaze. Like they're not. I feel like if you did a Google search, they would have been like big in the 40s and 50s, and it's like gone down or something. But again, I hope they can kind of come back, because I think they're important concepts. In a literal sense, but also in terms of how one could use it anecdotally. And you're a little bit talking on that for the gaze in the digital sense. And I want to get back to that, but I would love if you took a step back and just foundationally, what does a gaze mean to you? I would say artistically, as you are, in some ways, there's three gazes that you have as it relates to representation, where artists are to some extent gazing at you when you're going through your art creation process, or when you were looking at other muses, you would be gazing at them. And I think the other one, which we had touched on a little bit, which I think is really fascinating, is when you do art with your body, you're essentially gazing at yourself. So I guess, what does the gaze mean to you? And then foundationally, and then how do you see today, where we're doing all this remote, what does the gaze mean in today's day and age? And I guess then what would you think it would mean if and when we do return to some sort of normal?
Well, the gaze is your perspective. And when I talk about the gaze, that perspective is truly coming from the one at which you're watching. So if you take the idea of a movie, when we watch movies, they're typically directed by, white men. So as we watch this film, know that that lens at which you're watching the movie through is seen through that perspective. And if you take that point and talk about art, how do you see the artist? How is the artist defining themselves? What type of history do they hold? And all of that ends up being projected onto their canvas, their sculpture, whatever means of creating that is. So the gaze is really what you imbue into the work just by you being a person. So me as a muse, when I think about how I might put together a show, for example, there was a show that I worked on last year. I did a residency with a fellow muse, Emmett, and she and I, we posed together and we curated the artists. So we went through via Instagram, via our own personal archives, and just looked at the work that the artist created, and said, okay, so if we're going to invite these artists to draw us live and have people come participate, we want to make that the part of the show. So even the idea that we're choosing these artists who are coming to sit and draw us, we've already started thinking about their perspective, how they look at. Some artists, they only like to draw on contours. Some artists like to use globs of paint and paint with their fingers. Some artists have very fine details that take hours to etch out in graphite. And all of that helps to give a 360 view of how you interpret seeing me, how you interpret my presence, my humanity. The presence of my humanity is really what we're talking about, and how that's seen to someone given their particular gaze is what's most interesting. So in that show, An Evening with Muses, we posed, Yumemi and I, for 4 nights out of the fall. And at the end of every evening, we would collect drawings from some of the artists who wanted to participate. We put together a gallery show. So in that gallery show, the people who were in the hotel, just random, you know, patrons of the gallery, they got to come through and see what it was like for those artists to see us over the course of the fall during those poses that we put on. So it's all about understanding what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. You know, it's hard to walk or do as someone does, but I think that when we look at art, we're really seeing in the way that someone sees and the way that they see the world.
Yeah, I love the hologram perspective and projection meta nature. I think you do a really good job of opening up these fun kind of like upside down triangles of ways in which you can interpret. So for like, it's almost your gaze of creating a perspective on the curation of different artists whose gaze will then be their perspective on their representation of how they see you, which then is then, you know, viewed by others who will have their own perspective that they bring to it. Very simple, but it's also kind of complex to think about the interwoven nature of like how we all view stuff, you know, through our own lens. And sometimes when you're viewing something through someone else's lens, they could construe it, or one could construe it, or you could construe it as if it's, you know, in totality, but it's just a specific perspective from one's gaze, which I think is what you were saying earlier, and is also part of, I think, a lot of the conversations over the last few years of saying like, hey, this is not the rule of law, this is one's perspective. We need, you know, more perspectives to get a fuller picture of what is a collective reality, because a lot of our reality is told to us through a very narrow lens.
And that's the thing that I think that, you know, movements like the Black Lives Matter movement is kicking up. It's really bringing attention not only to the fact that, you know, our lives are important, our experiences are important, but the way we view the world is very important too. So thinking about an artist like Kehinde Wiley, I'm so inspired by him because I think that his work is truly revolutionary. You know, it's so referential in a way that seems familiar, but he's carved out a place that feels totally new. So, you know, I give it up to him. I think what he's doing in his lane is just so beautiful. So it constantly inspires me.
Yeah, he's such an amazing artist for so many reasons besides like his technical acumen. Like he is such a technically gifted artist, but the perspective he brings to the world of like fine art, large oil canvas is one that is not often seen by an African American, you know, artist who is bringing his gaze and his perspective. But I think another thing I really love, and I think what is so special, is his curation of his muses and subjects. And you were talking a little bit about, I think, your experience and how, you know, he wants people to, you know, wear what they wear and dress how they dress and look how they look. And that's what he wants to capture and represent. It isn't an overt curation. The curation is almost allowing people to present their perspective, of which then he captures.
And that's truly the thing about being a muse. I think you have to be the best version of yourself. And that in turn will pull people towards you. I say that whether it's in regards to just how you're living with the people in your life or if it's something that you're inspiring to. Just living authentically is what's going to pull people towards you. And that's what I think makes artists gravitate towards one muse versus another. There's just that certain thing that they possess that speaks to the narrative that they want to portray. It's almost like finding the right actor for the role, but there's no acting.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, you know, it's like, I don't know, I find it so interesting. If like, I'll put a link in, you know, literally, because I think it's so cool and stuff's on like Wikipedia, but just like rumors of war is like, I mean, it's monumental for so many different ways, but obviously, you know, this year has made it even more looked at and discussed and debated, and the significance and the location. And I don't know, I just think that your journey, I know you've talked on it a lot, but I think for maybe some of the people who are less familiar, just your personal kind of perspective on what being part of that process has meant to you. And I don't know, I mean, it's a statue that's going to be up, not whatever, like everything is eternal, but it'll be up more than probably your heartbeats on planet Earth. Maybe your soul will continue on in many forms, but that thing is going to be up for, hopefully hundreds of years.
Yeah, I think what we're really talking about is something that ultimately turns into generational wealth.
Mm.
Knowledge for me is the true wealth. And when we think about history and when we think about the history of the Confederacy in the United States, that is something that they were trying to establish as being truth through the idea of monuments and, making laws that will force people to act in a certain way. The war was lost by the Confederacy. And, when you go to a place like Alabama, when you go to a place like Charleston, South Carolina, where I'm from, and you can see these relics standing tall, or Richmond, Virginia, for that matter, you can see those relics standing very tall and they're very majestic. They're all the things that you use to describe rumors of war. It sends a mixed message, and it also sends a message that we support this idea, that this is something that, matters. And ultimately it's about downplaying someone else's humanity. And that's, for me, has always been a problem when I think about a lot of the racism that exists throughout the South. It's just so persistent, and it's something that smacks you in the face just as much as when you see those huge monuments. It's rough, it's hard to deal with, but when you think of what Kehinde's done with Rumors of War, this idea of what the future can mean, it's a beautiful vision to me, one that is inclusive, one that is multi-gendered. Like, the face of this monument is a composite. So it's not just one person, there are aspects of me in the work. And that's something that I think is more gratifying than it just being me, because at the end of the day, I'm like you. I'm like my neighbor. I'm like all these people that I exist with. And if they can see a portion of themselves in that, then that's important, and that means so much. And it's not something that is exclusionary or, holding up one group over another. It's just saying that this history matters and is relevant. And we'll have to think about it if we want to move into a positive and bright future.
Yeah, man, I think you said it so well, and I love how you started off that it's like generational wealth. I think that's pretty cool. I think it's well said. And I think, again, your journey being from Charleston, where you had mentioned the first shots of the Civil War
Yeah, absolutely.
were fired. To
Yeah.
now being you go, sorry.
Being from, Charleston, this place, it's like it runs so deep. Unless you've been to the South and unless know, it's hard to even give you a sense. Actually, this is a perfect example. So in the North, I've always said that racism is served cold. You'll be in someone's home, you'll be having dinner, everything's fine. And then all of a sudden, some word, some turn of phrase, or, stereotype is thrown across the table, and it's revealed, oh no, I'm having dinner with them. But in the South, you'll be in the street and they'll scream things at you across the street. So in some ways, it's more helpful to see that version of racism because you know what to do with it, you know where you stand. But at the end of the day, we have to get to a place where this way of being, we've moved beyond it. Because at the end of the day, living in New York, I meet so many people who are so different from me, and that's what makes life golden. I don't want to walk down the street and see 10 million versions of myself. I want to live as many versions of my life as I can. So if the people around me as different as possible, then I can do that. And I can learn from them, I can learn through them. So we have to get to this place of understanding and holding up voices that are different from our own.
Yeah, I love it, of like learning through people's perspective as well. It's like getting more of a distributed collective gaze. I think it's kind of like, it's like lots of different lights pointing at one center element, and the more kind of lights you get that are, from different angles with different light bases, you get this like rich, like it's like one of those LED TVs or something. It's like, it's millions of colors, millions of perspectives, versus it's like you're in a 7-Eleven or like an interrogation room and it's just a fluorescent light. It's myopic, it's singular, and you don't, it's like the Matrix or something, where all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, I've been seeing this my whole life. I've been wearing one set of glasses. There's so many other sets of glasses, and it shouldn't make people feel uncomfortable or overwhelming. I think that's like, maybe this is like me being Emmett stupid, but like, I don't know, I stopped eating meat and all that stuff, whatever. But like, I love being in I brought my dog to Puerto Rico, and like, this is stupid, but I'm just saying, I love seeing my dog down here. I've been down here all the time, but it's such a new experience for her. And I like just seeing it through her eyes. Or my friend who just, had a child, he's like, yo, man, it's crazy. Like, I'm just seeing everything again through like my child's eyes. And it gives you a richness, right? It's like hang out with people that have different backgrounds and different perspectives. Like, I have friends, I don't agree with a lot of stuff they think or do or whatever, but I know their intentions are good. They just have like a different perspective, right? And there's some people whose perspectives I don't understand, and it doesn't mean I'm right or they're right or someone's right or wrong. It just creates a richness and a tapestry of seeing life a little bit differently.
And this is the thing that makes art so special. When you think about the role of the artist, it's not only to document, but it's also to reveal things that wasn't said. We ask them to do that in a way that is truly authentic to them. So, just being able to see someone's interpretation of abstract ideas makes us think about something a little more, makes us sit on a topic a little more. So I very much love the idea that, as artists, we have this ability to make things seem viable. And
yeah, it's amazing. Creating art and being a part of art is so special.
Truly. And even if that is
manifesting ideas. Yeah. So I got like 2 more kind of questions for you. I got 10 million, but like, I also just want to say to everyone, listening and stuff, like, you can turn your camera on if you want in a little bit. And I'd love to just open up for anyone who has something to say or a question or a thought for Najee. I think that would be kind of fun to make this a little bit participatory. So I guess one question I wanted to ask to try to tie some of the other themes together was, I've been trying to get into meditation. I have, I've been doing it pretty good, junior level kind of style, but for the past, almost 100 days. And, I like this phrase, like, see the one who is seeing. And I think you had kind of said that a little bit earlier, and in some of the meditation stuff I'm doing, guided, because I'm trying to like learn, I'm not like master concentration guy yet, where I can rip it on my own. And a lot of it is getting outside of your head and like, looking at yourself in its entirety, not in a judgmental way, but removing, this perspective of you being inside, right here, your eyeballs, and you're just seeing everything as it is. It's just this collective consciousness, it's this collective energy field. And so I guess I just wondered what your kind of thoughts are transferring from the muse and the gaze into, I know you're very deep into and have been for a while, as you said, body positivity through yoga as well as meditation. You were leading some stuff in Herbert von King Park, which I thought was awesome. But how do you think that those areas tie into what we've been talking on?
Well, we're ultimately talking about wellness and peace of mind. When I think about the gaze, that also relates to how I see myself. So how do you see yourself? When you think of yourself, what comes to mind? What things come up? And the practice of musing, you're really just being present for someone. In several poses that I've done, I've had to hold them for days, weeks at a time, So when you think about what that means, returning to the same place, returning to the same posture, what does that do for your state of mind? What things for you come up, or does anything come up? And a lot of times I will sit, in a posture or stand in a posture, and all of a sudden I'm only thinking for 10 minutes straight. My legs are really tired. And finally, when I release myself to thinking that, okay, my legs are tired or my arms are tired, I can actually start to just be and start to feel what I feel inside. So sometimes it's oh my gosh, I can see a sliver of the sky through the window. I never noticed how beautiful clouds can be. So it starts to open up the world to me in a new way, albeit that this version of the meditation isn't with my eyes closed, but I am in absolute stillness. So that stillness provides a avenue to see what else comes up for you. Um, you would ask something else. I'm kind of losing myself.
No, again, you kind of hit the nail on the head with your first few words. I think you said it's about wellness, and I think that like meditation, yoga, they have their connotations of what the word means, but I think of yoga as almost like more like a full body kind of meditation where you're breathing and putting the air into certain parts of your body to release energy and release tension. And
Yeah,
meditation
absolutely.
a little bit more conceptual and meta to release yourself from like all the crap that goes on in the universe in your head.
Ultimately, yoga is about control and control of the body. So,
Mm.
when you think about a yoke and what that means, a yoke being the U-shaped with the bar that might go across to hold animals in place so that when they hold a field, they can actually stay in control. So when you
Mm.
yoke yourself, what are you doing? How are you coming closer to yourself? How are you controlling yourself? So even just overcoming your own breath so that you can get deeper into your mind's eye, overcoming your body just so that you can get deeper into your mind's eye. I think the thing that comes up for a lot of people when they hear the idea of a muse or the idea of an art model, even if you want to put it in very lame terms, um, they think about being nude and what that means to be in a place
Yeah.
that's that vulnerable in front of people. And if anything, it's quite the opposite. Let's keep in mind you're doing something that nobody else in the room is doing or would do because they would have been there in your place. So you now have their undivided attention. But how is it that you quell any nervousness that you have in your mind to really show up and be present in that moment and move in a way that is authentic to you? Like every posture that I take when I am posing, it does feel very meditative because, if you're in a handstand for 5 minutes, it's very different versus if you were in that same handstand for 3 minutes. So, of course, the blood's starting to rush through your head, the feet are starting to tingle, maybe you're losing your balance a little bit. But when someone else has the opportunity to gaze at what would otherwise only last for a quick second, I think so much more is revealed. So, your comfort that you have in said posture in your meditation is what is the most beautiful thing. And that's where the art comes from. It's the essence of what creates this thing that artists are constantly looking for.
Well said, Najee. I see you, Joe. I wanted to open it up. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions? Let's just shoot from the hip, hanging out virtually, gazing at each other. Would love to hear some other perspectives.
Yes, let's hear it.
Do you have any tips for sort of reaching a consistent, consistent, what's the word for, I guess, daily activity in yoga or meditation? I found myself starting, doing it for a couple of days or weeks, and then stopping or not being able to come back to my mind or get distracted while working a lot. Any tips, I guess, in either of those categories?
Sure. I think that this idea of meditation doesn't have to be as monolithic as we make it, and it doesn't have to look a certain way. So, what does it mean for you to find a calm mind? Maybe that's while playing video games, maybe that's while reading. But if you can find that same headspace doing nothing, I think that will allow you some room for growth. So, what I always start with in the morning is I'll wake up, I'll start with some light movement, maybe in bed or just outside of bed, and then I just find a comfortable place to sit and I just try to reflect on my day. I try to reflect on goals that I'm working towards. But I'm not sitting there with pen and paper. I'm not, you know, there with a vocal recorder trying to make notes or anything. I'm just sitting and I'm just being. What thoughts come into my mind, they do. I notice them. I try to take note, because if I'm feeling especially anxious that day, maybe I might be nervous. This morning I was a bit nervous trying to prepare for this talk and trying to make sure I had talking points, but you know, there's not too much to really put in front of the meditation that you set forth. Just try to be and see what comes up. And then also afterwards, be mindful of how you extend yourself. So journaling is something that is really important. After you've sat down for any period of time, of course thoughts are going to come up. But what thoughts come up, take note of those, because over a period of time, it's going to reveal a narrative to you that I'm sure will be very helpful in the long run, especially to understanding, where was my mind during those times. So that's a good way to look at meditation. It frees your mind for more to fall into it.
Well, what do you think the relationship between meditation and thoughts or emotions is? Like, I hear a lot of different definitions. Sometimes you're watching your thoughts and accepting them. Sometimes you're, I guess, sort of trying to clear your mind. What's your opinion on that? What's your view?
So you're asking the difference between thoughts versus emotions?
I guess the relationship between thoughts and the relationship between meditation and emotion. So are you trying to be at peace with your emotions? Are you trying to have no emotions or thoughts?
Well, at peace with what comes up, and ultimately your reaction is what you have control of. When we're thinking about meditation, we should also think about how we show up in the world. Do you allow the bad conversation that you had with a family member to then roll into your interaction with a friend that you might have an hour after? So if you meditate on what had happened in that first interaction, you might be revealed that, oh my goodness, like perhaps I was acting out of turn or just carrying something that didn't need to be brought. So understanding the emotions that come when you meditate is, I guess, how I'm drawing that parallel between the two, and hopefully that clarifies it for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, and just to add on to that, a simple thing, Najee, like I started journaling like a month ago. Yeah, it's funny, like, you do it when you're a kid and stuff, you have a diary or whatever, but I really I'll try to like meditate for 10 minutes in the morning and then just write down my thoughts, and they just freaking pour out. And I got to think about this. Why does this person say that? Or like, I forgot this, and I feel like it's just all this information in your head, and it's kind of like turning the faucet on and just kind of letting it drain out. And I just feel like, I don't know, so like light after those 10 minutes little things in a row. And just trying to do that on a daily basis. Like, I just try telling myself, it's like you brush your teeth, you wash your face every day, like those just take like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. Like, it's the same thing. It's just kind of like, as you said earlier, taking care of yourself and wellness. It's like they don't teach financial literacy in school, but they also don't teach like mental health and wellness and that type of stuff. So you got to kind of listen to these type of talks or meet people like you, and someone put you on, and now you're putting Joe on, right? And so he'll figure his path out, and then he'll put someone else on. It's kind of still old school, passed down person to person.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all one big cycle. So, when we think about this traumatic cycles that are happening throughout the world, even that are unfolding right now in America's political stage, there's a lot that we're going to have to take stock of. And I think that this time that we've all had throughout this closure due to the pandemic has allowed all of us to take stock of our own lives and take stock of the things that actually matter, because we're not being pulled in a million different directions. So if we take the same level of consideration into our own lives with our own person, because I can't control what goes on across the world, but I can control what happens in my body, in my vessel, and how I react to the information that I'm receiving. So meditation allows you those tools to be able to navigate said situations with clarity and focus, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of unclear things happening on the world stage, and people are lacking a lot of focus. But I think it's because we've lost sight of what's truly important, and it's ourselves first, of course.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Like, I love the phrase, like, you can't change anyone but yourself. You can, try to influence someone, but you have the power over yourself. And it means also you can't change the actions of some other person, but you can choose how you react to it. And easier said than done. I'm not always, I can be impulsive and react to stuff, sometimes, but I think that's why I like trying to, like, calm your nerves and calm your reaction time. I think that's like another thing for meditation, is just like giving yourself a few extra milliseconds to a few seconds before you put out information once you've taken in information. And I think, sounding like an old person, but like nowadays with all the stuff online, it's just a constant deluge of information that you want to quick react to and have a hot take and just make binary judgments that then can go out to lots of people. And the world changes, technology changes. I'm not to disparage anything of it. I think technology is changing so fast, we don't necessarily know how to navigate through it with our brain not having a reaction time that changes over the past 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, so on and so forth. So I think it is hard for everyone. I think, as you said, being, the pandemic and a lot of us being sheltering in place, et cetera, it has given us a lot of time to view ourselves and to gain perspective, or to have perspective. But I don't think right now it's the easiest thing to deal with when you're sitting here going, the fuck am I doing with my life? What the hell is going on out there? And I think that's why I've turned to kind of these tools, because I was like, man, my normal coping mechanisms, I'm underwater.
They don't
Like, I
even
can't.
seem to work.
It's
Yeah, I think
and
a
it kind
lot
of
of
shows you that I was taking shortcuts before, and you have to really deeper take care of yourself now, because the stakes are kind of it's just harder and higher.
Absolutely, and it's something that when I think about it, it's the most diplomatic thing. Like, we all have this ability to just stop, sit, and gather ourselves. That's all we really need to do. We don't really need to share that practice with anybody. It doesn't have to be something, like I said, that looks a certain way. It's doing whatever is true to you so that you can find that peace of mind. And for me, it came by way of musing. So the time that I was being of service to someone else revealed to me that I needed to just give myself more of the same energy, and how I could then take my gaze and shift it back towards the artist. And that in turn creates another way of seeing. So check in with yourself, check in and see what things come up, because I'm sure it will reveal a multitude of things.
Speaking of checking in, I want to know if we got any other thoughts or questions. I see a lot of nice regulars in here. I can see Sam, Mark, John, Joe, Jesse's got some patterners, Des, Dan, Carson, Ali. What do you guys got? What do you think? Hey, John. Hey, Sam.
Yes, it's a small group, y'all, so don't be shy. Here, ask me stuff.
I got one. Practicing as a muse from home, how has that experience changed how you view your environment or your surroundings or the objects you have in your own life?
Yes, Jonathan, thank you for that question. It's definitely changed since the pandemic has struck. Taking things virtual was such an interesting way for that to shift. And, obviously so much of our lives are digital, in the sense that we create these avatars of ourselves, or we project the best version of ourselves. And so much of musing is not about these ideals that we create. It's about seeing the roles that the body naturally has when you fold yourself, or seeing the cellulite that someone has, or even the scars, or being able to see what someone's tattoos look like. These intimate things that you can only really see when you're live in the room with someone. And for me, the biggest challenge has just been trying to capture a way to pull people in closer that was just given when you were in the same room with them. So for me right now, I've been, interestingly enough, like using a drone to photograph myself and to document myself. I'm in the midst of filming a series right now that I'm calling Solitude, and the first of these videos was shot at the Naval Cemetery landscape in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. This really beautiful landscape that used to be a cemetery for Naval and Marine Corps. And they've repurposed the landscape, made it into this beautiful planned landscape. So architects came in, they designed it, used all indigenous wildflowers and pollinators to bring a new sense of life to the space. And for me, I thought that going there to shoot myself was interesting because it would, one, make people wonder, where did he shoot this? Where is this? So I'm creating a new sense of engagement, not just with me, but with the environment. And then a new perspective. So thinking about that gaze again and shifting to a digital one and allowing something that's as autonomous as a drone to capture what I look like, so then the person who's watching that video can interpret that experience. It's a really interesting layered way of creating, but to me, all of those aspects are really necessary in order to still maintain that interest that, here again, was so easy when we were all just in the same space. But because things are online, you know, Fashion Week was totally online, sports have shifted to being, you know, things that we only watch on TV. How do you get that same energy, that same, like, oh, I saw that little detail, or the bead of sweat fall? Like, you have to pull people in a new way. So for me, it's been very interesting trying to reimagine that, but that's the art.
Hopefully that was helpful. I mean, John, if you had some follow up, and then wanted to see what you had, Sam.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was.
Thank you.
I actually, like, I've been thinking about this almost exactly what you were just talking about. Something that, like, I meditate on, and I don't know that I would call it meditating on regularly, but think about a lot, is kind of like complexifying the digital gaze is like how I kind of think about it. Because in my conception of like what is friendship and what is reality, interacting with people digitally first is going to be the new norm. And so how do we experience what might have before been sort of authentic understandings of others, because of kind of an in-person or an IRL first meeting? How do we conceive of that digitally? And I think that, like, one thing that I've heard you talk about a lot is, like, you know, the gaze should really do, or like one understanding of like an artist's gaze should really reach to like kind of stripping away barriers that people put up to like really find what is their like authentic self, or what is the authentic meaning behind something. And I think that, like, I think a lot about like, how do I put out like an authentic digital me? And so I'd love to kind of hear you talk about what that could look like to you, or what it has looked like sort of in your experiences of that, or like what you think have been good examples of that. And I think, Emmett, you probably have thought about that too. So yeah.
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's hard to say what is ideal. I mean, I think we all have Instagram accounts and we all see what, how plastic things can be and how real things can be. It needs, I think, to toe a fine line. So for me, I tend to only share things that are related to the topic that I'm trying to communicate. My entire life is not internet fodder. I'm not going to pretend that it is, and it never has been. And I'm 33 years old, so I'm from a generation that only came to know the internet and came to know, you know, all of these ways of technology, but I still very much love them. I just don't want to engaged in a 24/7 kind of way. And I think that we sell ourselves short when that is the standard to which we have to interact. Now, I say all that to say that you can choose your type of interaction, and from there, just what you share. And I don't mean to say it in a way that sounds like, oh, I'm not sharing everything, just certain things, but whatever you do share, I think people need to see a certain level of consistency in it, and they need to see that it's something that you've been doing, so that when they come into the fold or come to know you, they can see, oh, well, there's the history of it. I can backtrack and see where this person's going with it, and it's not all over the place. It's something that anyone can join in with and feel a part of, and it's not exclusionary, but it's still authentic for you. So hopefully that hits the nails for you. Emmett, I look
Yeah.
to what your thoughts are too.
Yeah, I'll just freestyle. I don't have like a fully formed kind of thesis. I've been I've been reading I only read nonfiction for like the past 12, 15 years, like nerdy self-help books, what, I don't know, just like I'm always like trying to learn self-improvement or history or whatever. And again, this pandemic, I was like, dude, I need to read some fiction. Like I haven't, I used to read voraciously fiction when I was in high school and a little bit when I got into college, and I kind of stopped. But I picked up this book called Snow Crash. I was like, what I like is like sci-fi, because it's kind of like potentially nonfiction of the future wrapped in fiction with characters and situations. Snow Crash really like concepted what is called the metaverse, which is what like Fortnite is kind of like this early kind of version where, or like Ready Player One, where we have these avatars that we go and coexist with other people from around the world in a very thoughtful way. And that's where the metaverse, or what video game developers are trying to create, et cetera, of leading this forward, is that like it's not a closed wall. It's not Apple iOS or whatever. It's all the different. You can be I'm Emmett on this platform and I'm Emmett on this platform, and I can coexist just like I would be who I am if I traveled to a different country. And he concepted kind of the term in popular culture avatar. And the other one I'm reading right now is Neuromancer, which basically is the basis for the Matrix. And again, it's a lot of these kind of like digital representation from the 80s and 90s and what they thought the future would be. And I like being in the future for them and seeing what I think it is versus what it could be. And I'll wind down my rant, which is anti-Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, not overly anti-him or this and the third, but he wanted a single identity, which was Facebook, which is who you are for work should be who you are for personal versus who you are for hobbies versus who you are for your small town. And it got into explicit challenges because people were like, well, I don't identify with, the gender I was born with, or I don't identify now with how I represent or see myself. And he was like, no, you got to say your legal name, legal representation, like it's got to be pure identity so we can have accountability. And that's the explicit part. The implicit is that I think just like a perspective, a gaze, we have a lot of different holographic ways in which we want to present ourselves. And I think that's a beauty for online, especially if you're from like a small town. Imagine you have something that makes you feel not like others, and you're in a small closed group and it's all the people around you. It's very hard to get a full representation of yourself if that is different than what others think is the norm. And online, I think, is this great resource to tap into other like-minded people for whatever your interest may be, whether it is something which is repressed or something which is just you're into knitting, you're into purple knitting. And so I think, to wind it back down to Sam's question, there's two answers to it. One, I think a lot of the digital social landscape has been, of the past 10 years or so, has been for scale. It's been who can be the loudest in the town hall. And that actually isn't really truly, you meet someone who's an influencer, right? Like a real influencer, and they've got 100,000 followers and up. And sometimes it's kind of this weird, like it takes a while to shift when you meet them in person, because they're obviously not who they represent, because they're representing just a trope of themselves for one area. I think the thing that is where stuff is going a little bit right now, and I don't know where it will, maybe it'll go to the metaverse, but I think it's more like Geneva, Sam, where it's like smaller groups. And I think you can just be who you are, which is what I would boil it down to. The simplest thing is just being yourself and finding ways of the avatar of self, because I am who I am if you walked into this room now and I got a fake background and I'm yelling into a computer screen, but I'm just trying to be authentically who I am. So I think, Sam, I know you and I've met you, but the digital avatar of yourself with your fingernails and your quirky questions and your mustache, like I get a pretty good, you know, reading of who you are just because you're being yourself. I think we get into challenging situations when the de facto is telling us to be something or we should be something. And I think it's important to countercultural push against what you should be and just be who you are, which sounds simple, but I think that's kind of a summation of a lot of what Najee is talking about, is seeing yourself and understanding yourself. And what I was saying is not easy. And I feel like I've gone through a lot of my life struggling in my own ways of like, how do I just be who I am? And I think probably everyone here
Right,
can
and
relate
you
to
know,
that.
to build on that, you know, even just something as simple as saying, we're all at home. You know, we all don't have to leave our house to go, in this case, have a talk or take a meeting. It's like, how would we have all presented ourselves if we needed to leave the house? You know, would that have been any different? And I think that this idea of how do we show up? Is it with the full glam makeup or is it just like t-shirt, jeans, like whatever? You know, we have to pick where we want to be. And I think even in life, when we're talking about presenting ourselves online, that consistency, that authenticity, it just comes through. You can tell when something feels just not real, you know, it starts to ooze something after a while.
Sam, I love the question. I know you're thinking a lot about it. I think it's a really rich area to explore because we are meeting so many more people are meeting and getting first impressions digitally. And I think it's so new. Again, human biology and all that, it doesn't change nearly as fast as technology does, right? So like now so much of society has moved to where we get our first impressions from, it's not seeing someone at a coffee shop or in, you know, a college campus. Even right now, especially, like I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a senior in high school or to be a freshman in college, and all the nervousness of you're just trying to find your way and you want to meet and see other people. And now you're kind of, you know, you don't get that IRL, as you said, experience. So I think it is a really it's challenging, but I also think it's anthropologically contemporary living through it. Truly fascinating.
And I don't want to take over everything, but just really quickly, I just want to say, like, I think often about the difference between what I call IRL and IDL, like in digital life, because I think that is a reality. Is that like not even just a freshman in college, but like think about like a 10-year-old who's like going into 5th grade or 6th grade and like has a Snapchat and has an Instagram and like is creating a personal brand when their own biological impulses are not yet there to like understand who their ego and who their identity is. And so like that complicates everything. And talking about like finding authenticity, I just wanted to say really quickly, Najee, I loved what you said about consistency and making kind of your whatever authentically is you, making it what you put out as what is going to be authentically read. And like that doesn't have to be constant. Like consistency doesn't have to be constant. You can change who you are or what you want to put out authentically over time. And that's what's going to kind of shine through. That's at least where I've landed. And so I loved that you said that too.
Yes, I'm glad that resonated with you.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say we're at 6. So if anyone had any last questions or thoughts, the sun's going down for me. You can see my silhouette. It's melting. I mean, just thank you, Najee. Time flew by. Your calming voice and presence is amazing. And let me actually just put in your Instagram just for I mean, you know, why not? Because I'm a redundant guy, but that's Najee's Instagram. And I got your website also, which I love the colors, love the typography, love all the information on it. But I guess maybe do you have like some closing thoughts or?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that after, you know, giving this sense of myself, I really hope that you guys will take some time to explore my page, but also explore the artist page that I work with. So if you look at my Instagram, you'll see that there's a lot of different interpretations of me. Explore those artists, support the artists. I think that we're in a time right now where art is really being set aside as a certain type of luxury, but as I said before, it's right now that art is making these conversations, these topics more relevant than ever, because we're getting to see how someone is experiencing this whole thing right now through their vision and, you know, their expression of art. So it's important to take a chance to get to know some of those artists, look through their work, and just see in what ways it inspires you. I think that it's the museum that we carry in our pockets, our phones. And sometimes you don't need to go somewhere to feel inspired. You can just do a little bit of scrolling, a little bit of deep diving. And that's really what I'm here for. I'm truly that connective rod, I think, between the people who look at the artwork and the artists who make the work, because I represent both aspects of it.
You're a calming presence in the chaos, which is New York City.
Can you hear what's happening outside? It's like, it's crazy.
Yeah. But it makes your calmness even more stark. And, you know, I think it just shows like, you know, how powerful you've been practicing what you're preaching. Okay, everyone.
I mean, these are things that we can't control, but we can only control ourselves and how we show up. So show up for yourself and show up well.
Thank you, Najee. Thank you, everyone, for showing up for us and for yourself. And talk to you all later.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
Yeah.